Greetings, happy Monday. Welcome to the Steve Deace Show here live and on demand on BlazeTV radio and podcast with Todd Erzin and Aaron McIntyre. I am Steve Deace, and we're brought to you by our good friends over at First Cup Coffee Company with a flavor for every freedom-loving American. You can try it today or try it again today if you'd like, and you've already tried it before. But you can still go to firstcup.com, use the promo code DACE, and you'll get 10% off when you do. Firstcup.com is where you want to go. That's firstcup.com, and use the code DACE. Shipped to you within days of being roasted. You can't beat it at firstcup.com. Use the promo code DACE. Also want to remind you about a new book that is out that I think is particularly timely, especially for the young men of this era. It's called Full-Time Work and the Meaning of Life by David Bahnsen. It goes to show that it is in work, whether that is effort, service, striving. I just got a note from a woman who said she was trying to defend me against somebody on X who hates me. And I'm like, well, that's a long list. Okay. Who claims I only work 2 hours a day. And I'm like, well, and she was like, what should I tell her? And I wrote her back. I'm like, last year I did 230 original shows, 20 live speaking engagements around the country. I produced a theatrical release film and wrote a best-selling book. If you can do that in 2 hours a day, I am clearly doing this wrong. Fair?
Fair.
Yeah, I'm doing this way wrong. Okay, so you can't. All right. And we find effort or meaning in that effort, in that striving, in that service, and every kind of that. We can discover our meaning and purpose. A significant and successful life is one rooted in full-time productivity and cultivation of God's created world. That lines right up with our theme this year, which is dominion. Hard to take dominion passively. You have to kind of do it actively. All right, so you want to go to fulltimebook.com. It's available for purchase right now at Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can also visit fulltimebook.com for more information. Fulltimebook.com to get more information on David Bahnsen's Full-Time Work and the Meaning of Life at fulltimebook.com. All right, coming up at the bottom of the hour, we're going to talk to our good friend Bob Vander Plaats from The Family Leader. We'll get a preview of his thoughts of Thursday's debate between Biden and Trump. But I also want to show him some data and get his take on it when it comes to what's happened in the last couple of election cycles, because I want to get your take on it too. And what's fraud, what's ballot harvesting, what is all the polls are just, wrong, all in one direction. They're all wrong in the one direction. The direction they usually favor, they're all wrong in the direction they usually favor, except they're totally right, with the exception of a few places where they have to, the one side has to be able to win in order to win the outcome. And that's a lot of coincidences to you, Todd. What do you think?
It's just a few.
Just a few.
It's a little early in the week to be pulling the gun out too. But here we are.
Here we are, indeed. So we're going to talk about that at the bottom of the hour with our good buddy Bob Vander Plaats. And then next hour, our good buddy Peter McCullough sent us over a video about the next scamdemic. I had a chance to watch it over the weekend. I definitely think it is something we should watch with you as a show. We're going to let you see this in its entirety. It's about 20 minutes or so in the next hour of the show, and then we're going to discuss it and talk about it here afterwards as well. We're going to, instead of the last one we all had to react to. Okay, we all had to react to the last scamdemic. We all got caught with our knickers down, this show included. Now, some of us pulled them back up long before others, okay? But all of us at some point in time got caught with our knickers around our ankles. Every single one of us did, okay? So maybe, I know that's kind of not our thing to do, and I've told you before, there's nothing necessarily immoral about being a reactionary. It depends on what it is that you are reacting to, okay? Now, it's not always the most strategically effective position to be the one reacting all the time, right? Typically, the one on offense, the one who's taking the initiative, the one who's the aggressor. I'm a big believer in the philosophy of solving your problems with aggression, okay? Doesn't mean that, now we're east of Eden here, so there's no 100% strategy, but more times than not, the aggressor, the initiator, the risk taker wins. And what if we could like proactively get out in front of the next one? I know you're going to laugh, but we're going to try to do it anyway on this show coming up in the next hour.
We're plucky like that, you know?
We are. We're just a little podcast that could, indeed. All right, but let's get to it. Here's Aaron's rundown of what happened while we were away.
What happened while we were away, brought to you by the Veep stakes, are reaching their conclusion. Donald Trump told NBC over the weekend he has selected his running mate, but he still needs to inform that person. He also said they'll likely be at the CNN debate this Thursday. The websites TrumpBurgum.com, TrumpCarson.com, TrumpScott.com, and TrumpRubio.com, among others, have already been registered domains for a while now, although it seems the most chatter recently has surrounded Burgum and Carson. Joe Biden will not be leaving his hidey hole this week ahead of the debate. He left for Camp David late last week and is reportedly on a steady diet of methamphetamine, lithium, and delicious Soylent Green. Kamala Lady Gook update.
Why is the race so close? These races are always close. It's the election of the President of the United States. And everyone in an election for President of the United States will critically examine all of the issues and make a decision.
And now meet Tyler Cherry. He's the new White House Deputy Communications Director. He's a white man who enjoys wearing dresses, extols Jew haters, hates white people, and believes the police are, quote, slave patrols. Gird your loins. The Supreme Court has agreed to hear an appeal from the Biden administration seeking to block state bans on chemical castration and meatball surgery for minors. The justice's action comes as several red states, as you know, have enacted a variety of restrictions, rightly, on meatball surgery in the name of gender, dudes competing in women's sports and using women's bathrooms, and drag shows for children. In Los Angeles over the weekend, pro-Hamas orcs blocked the entrance to a Jewish synagogue in one of the most heavily Jewish neighborhoods in the country. At one point, the mob beat a Jewish woman in the streets. If you want to see the end result of globalism and progressivism, look no further than Germany. Check out this headline from The Publica. Woman convicted of offending migrant gang rapists receives longer prison sentence than the rapists. No, that's not a sensationalized headline. A horrific assault took place in 2020 and involved multiple groups of migrant men, some of whom were in Germany illegally, independently attacking a 14-year-old girl in Hamburg's Stadtpark over the course of one night. Yet a German woman had to spend a weekend in jail for a message on social media calling one of the rapists a, quote, dishonorable rapist pig. Meanwhile, 8 of the 9 men charged with rape, including the man she messaged, ended up serving no jail time, despite their sperm being found on the 15-year-old victim's body and witnesses describing several videos of the assault that were shared. Meanwhile, back at home, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal had herself a good chuckle during an MSNBC interview last week in which she mocked news coverage of the case of an Ecuadorian illegal alien accused of having bound, gagged, and raped a 13-year-old girl in a Queens, New York park.
There's a lot of fear-mongering.
There's a lot of fear-mongering, absolutely.
And I think it's kind of remarkable that the polls I look at, the national polls, actually Americans still support immigrants. They support immigration. It's just that they would like to see a system that actually works and that can keep them safe and secure. And all of us want that. And, you know, I've been working on this issue for 20 years since before I came to Congress.
Yes, terribly funny there, Pramila. A group of 5 illegals were arrested late last week after they allegedly kidnapped a 14-year-old Indiana girl and took her to Missouri. 2 men were arrested late last week in connection to the murder of a 12-year-old Texas girl who was found strangled to death in a creek. They were Venezuelan illegals here in the U.S. Nevertheless, Donald Trump said during his appearance on the All In podcast, he wants green cards for foreigners who have completed their college education in the United States.
Please promise us you will give us more ability to import the best and brightest around the world to America.
I do promise, but I happen to agree. That's why I promise. Otherwise, I wouldn't promise. Let me just tell you that it's so sad when we lose people from Harvard, MIT, from the greatest schools, and lesser schools that are phenomenal schools also. And what I wanted to do, and I would have done this, but then we had to solve the COVID problem because that came in and, you know, sort of dominated for a little while, as you perhaps know. But what I want to do and what I will do is you graduate from a college, I think you should get automatically as part of your diploma a green card to be able to stay in this country. And that includes junior colleges too. Anybody graduates from a college, you go in there for 2 years or 4 years, If you graduate or you get a doctorate degree from a college, you should be able to stay in this country.
And now a Love is Love Pride Month update. Michael Knappen, the chair of Maryland's Democratic Party LGBTQ plus Diversity Leadership Council, was caught soliciting sex from a boy he believed was 14 years old. Rumble content creator Alex Rosen caught the would-be predator up in a ruse he created, pretending to be a 14-year-old boy, and caught up with the Maryland Politico at a restaurant recently to catch a predator style reading the receipts of his messages to that supposed 14-year-old boy.
Anyway, you're the head of the LGBTQ Dems in Maryland. Okay. How long have you been in that position for?
Since fall.
Since fall, okay. Is that like a paid position? Okay, just more of a volunteer type thing? Is it like a super PAC or something, or is it just a... Okay. This stuff said here, like, you know, I want to rape you, I want to see how much of a you are. What was kind of said about that?
I hope you try to get away once I start you.
Yeah.
I like the fantasy, and he seemed to enjoy it. And I didn't know this person, and I never intended to meet him.
Do you think that's appropriate, though? Like,
no, of course. No, of course not.
I mean, here we said it's okay if you want to jerk off looking at it, talking about your and you said, stop by this morning so I can stretch your hole. Can't wait to make you my little and this was later that, or 4 days later with no response. Can't wait to make you my little baby boy. Okay.
Happy Pride Month indeed. And finally, this from the Babylon Bee. Scientists torn on whether to blame heat wave on climate change, Trump, or white supremacy. And that's what happened while we were away.
Aaron's montage brought to you by our friends over at Jace Medical. You cannot completely exempt yourself from public health. You cannot take total dominion over your own health because we are all going to die. The death rate is 100%. Okay, so you right away, you can't have total dominion over your health because you're going to die. You can do everything right and just, you could have the greatest blood sugar score. You could, know how to spell triglycerides, let alone avoid them in your diet. And then you just get by a bus and you're done here. And we'll see you on the other side. Okay, so you can't control completely your health. All right. On top of that, you also can't do certain things that your health will need to yourself. You can't do surgery on yourself if you break a bone, for example. All right. But there are ways that you can exempt yourself from as much of whatever has become of our public health system as we have sadly come to know since COVID. And one of those ways is to practice better preventative health, make better life choices, and then take as much control over your own medications as you possibly can with our friends at Jace Medical. Just ask yourself a simple question. Do you want Anthony Fauci determining? The guy who gave us remdesivir and said ivermectin that won a Nobel Prize was horse-paste and a dangerous drug. Right? You want that guy determining your health? How about your parent, grandparent, elderly parent who's on Medicare, Medicaid, and a total ward of the state? You want Francis Collins singing sonnets to poisonous injections and masks? Want him making those calls? Probably not. So get a backup. All right. You never know when the next medication will be the next one to say, the next venerated, celebrated medications, the next one they'll tell us, hey, yeah, that's dangerous. That amoxicillin, boy, that's really bad. Well, that doxycycline, it's poisonous now. Yeah, that's what's in the Jace case. But now you can expand it as well to what medications you are taking in many cases. They've got a wide menu for you to expand to. Go to jacemedical.com, J-A-S-E for jacemedical.com. Use the code DACE at checkout for the discount on your order. Code DACE at checkout at jacemedical.com. All right, two things I want to note from Aaron's montage in particular. Let's, pardon the pun, let's start in the rear. By what was happening there at the very end. You need to understand this about the history of pedophilia and pederasty. Okay? That the reason why in traditionally Western and biblically based cultures, these things have been linked with homosexuality and effeminate men and dress is because for these things to take root in a culture requires grooming. It can't happen organically. Someone has to be groomed. Even if you believe people are born this way, and I don't really care if they are, because Jesus said you had to be born what, Aaron?
Again.
So yeah, born this way is not a defense. You have to be born again. So everybody's born this way. Everybody's born a sinner, Todd, correct?
Yes.
So we're all born this way in some respect. That's why Jesus says you have to be born again. So we're all born this way. That's not a defense. But even if you were to buy into that, it's irrelevant. Because this activity in and of itself cannot pass itself on. Can men have babies? No. Can women conceive a child without male sperm? No. So this activity cannot perpetuate itself. Therefore, it requires the grooming of the next generation. It doesn't come complete with its own legacy maker. It does not. It does not come complete with its own heritage installer. It does not. It has to manipulate a society in order to pass itself on. And so whom would be getting groomed? I saw an excellent question offered by Kingsley Cortez on X this morning. I don't know this for sure. I think, is that Steve Cortez from the Trump White House? Is that his daughter?
I'm not sure.
There's a great resemblance. Okay. So I'm not sure if she is or not. It's a great resemblance, but she asked just a mind-numbingly brilliant question today. She said, why is there never drag queen storytime hour at the nursing home? One of those questions when you stop and think about it, you're like, remember a few weeks ago, we were like, wait a minute. That is a great point. If we're just going to print money, then why do we have any foreign debt? Let's just at least have one stream of debt and be indebted to ourselves. You know what I'm saying? Like, if we're just going to just randomly just print dollar bills, then why tack on foreign debt to it? Just choose one. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And you're already halfway home. If you just choose one, you can probably just deal with that for time in memoriam when you've got the level of weaponry we do. But when you're stupidly doing both, it just doesn't. Now you're just nuking yourself, right?
Sure.
Okay. Similarly, one of those other questions like, I wanted to think about that myself a long time ago. I'll tell you why. You want to know why there's no drag queen story hour at the nursing home? They can't be groomed. She's postmenopausal, and without blue pills, he's past the age. Okay, so there's no one to groom. Can't pass it on.
Must be a statute of limitations on those blessings of liberty at some age, Steve.
Indeed. And that would be it. That would be the age we reach it, in fact. These things must be passed on to the youth. The youth must be corrupted. They have to be groomed. And that's why you saw this kind of you see this kind of grooming in every culture where this activity takes root. Grooming follows. You see this in Bedouin cultures. I pointed out before, during the Crusades, the Muslim hierarchy, the military leaders would bring boy toys with them, boys barely of age that were being groomed, that were used in place of their wives for sexual gratification. They brought them to the front. You see this in Greco-Roman culture. Wherever this takes root, the grooming of the young must happen because it will not naturally be able to find heirs because the activities themselves don't produce them. And that's why in biblical times, in the era of a biblical times and in an era where biblical worldview was ascendant in the West, these activities were linked together. They understood this. What we allowed is for these things to be divorced from each other. And they won the first argument. Again, just go read out After the Ball from 1988, and the entire era we've lived in will all make sense. They won the first argument, so now they're going to come back and win the next one. And you see that play out in that video. It's unavoidable. There's a phenomenal Twitter thread from a gay man named Chad Felix Green that was on over the weekend, or an X thread. I keep forgetting to call it that. It was an X thread from over the weekend. Did you guys see this?
Yeah.
And he openly discusses this. He started having gay sex at 14. What do we typically do to people who are adults who have sex with 14-year-olds? What do we typically do? We arrest them, right?
Are we sure?
Well, that's what we used to do. But
how's my gay marriage going to affect you, Steve?
Indeed. We were always going to end up here because it can't perpetuate itself. So it has to find means. It has to find petri dishes. It has to groom, has to co-opt the youth and the young. It has to. because it doesn't come with its own in-house regenerator. Doesn't have a way to build a legacy or to leave an heir. And it's important for you to understand that now in the era in which we are into.
You're describing two levels of grooming. I mean, even if it's a red light district or a subculture, that the victims have to be groomed.
Correct.
Our entire culture has been groomed to believe this nonsense.
That's exactly correct. Yes. And many Western cultures did agree with this nonsense until this thing called what came along? Christianity. Until this thing called Christianity came along and replaced the old religions with a new one. And you have to understand, something will always rule, something must always be worshipped. Someone's religion is getting promoted. It's just going to be a matter of which one. Now, the other point I want to make is, I don't know if you intended this or not, Aaron, but the way that you sequenced the events as it relates to immigration, did you intend this on purpose?
If it's brilliant, yes. If not, no.
That's the right answer.
But I did put these in a particular order. I'm not sure if it's the order that you think is brilliant, but it's how I did it.
So let's start here. Okay. Does anybody, even if Trump implemented the absolutely mind-numbingly dumb position that he articulated there on that podcast, which, by the way, was Hillary Clinton's position in the 2016 election, okay? That college graduates, I mean, raise your hand if you think handing out degrees, to green cards to, I'm here for Hamas studies at Columbia University, if you really think that's a great idea, okay?
See, I wouldn't have put it in this order if he wouldn't have gone out of his way to say, and what? Junior colleges.
Yeah.
ITT Technical Institute. I'm here from Somalia to receive my degree in, I don't know, information technology.
Because apparently ITT analyst is a job Americans don't want to do anymore,
Yes.
Aaron.
This is so dumb on so many levels.
Yes.
I mean, even forget just Hamas studies, Steve. How are the bio majors doing these days in terms of being leaders of humanity?
We've gone from we have to let all these people in to pick our berries and mow our lawns and pack our meats because Americans, and I don't mean that in the context of the topic I was just doing. All right. So we have to let all these people in to do this. Okay. Otherwise, because Americans don't want to do these jobs anymore. Okay. Although there is an increasing amount of Americans that want to pack meats for a living. All right. But there's a lot. We don't want to do those jobs anymore. But now it's gone to, well, now Americans don't want to do ITT work. Americans don't want to do the actual jobs that make money and people get hired for. They don't want to do those jobs either. So we got to bring in a whole bunch of people from the third world to do it for us.
Like if this was merely just them saying, hey, we want to bring in the top minds from around the world and inculcate them. Some of the same people who are like quiet as kept right now went out of their way, rightfully so, of lambasting, the Confucius Institutes at various universities. Because why? Because they were spying on our technology and spying on our research. This is just dumb.
Do you guys remember the numbers we looked at during COVID? How many Chinese college graduates come over here every year? You guys remember the number was? It was over 300,000. Now that was in 2019. I don't know what the numbers are now. Okay, but if we essentially brought over during the fall of 2019 and the winter of 2020 over 300,000 potential super spreaders of the Wuhan flu, the China virus, that were attending our universities, where these would of course be mass spreading events, all in the name of we're one big happy globalist family. Let me say that even if Trump were to implement that, would that technically still be, not even technically probably, would that even still be better than the immigration policy of the current regime? Just stick with me. Would that still be better? By and large. Come on, guys. It would still be better. All right, just play along here for a minute. All right, it would be better, right? It'd be better. That's better than open borders where anybody can come. And what is it? Hundreds of thousands a month basically are coming at this point. Okay, so it would be better. All right. So what happens whenever a show like this does this conversation, some of your knickers will get in a bind. Let's say this so better than that because we can't do any better than that, but judge ourselves by the absolute worst people, the worst standards. If we're better than that, then it's good. Okay. That's not the point of this, actually. The point of this is If you want Trump to win, that won't do the job. And I'll tell you why. If you accept the premise of your opponent's arguments, even if you will not take them, we all just said a minute ago, even if Trump implemented this, that he probably would still have a better immigration policy than what we have going right now with them, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. But here's the thing. He is starting from largely a lot of the same premises that the other side is starting from with their on why they have open borders, right?
Which is why Aaron and I were silent
Correct.
for so long because
you skipped you were skipping a step. I wanted you to do this one step at a time, okay? So you have to understand, if you accept the premise of your opponent's argument, for example, we've got one tranny mascot, Bruce Jenner, but they've got a fleet of them. It doesn't matter.
There you are.
Okay, because the enemy, what he will do is he will go to the world and say, these people aren't any better. Why are they your judge? And those people will respond to their father and say, you're right. They're a bunch of hypocrites. We got one tranny who still won't complete the surgery and spends most days on Fox News calling out men and women's sports, right? Okay? But he is, every time we put him on there and put him out there as our mascot, he inoculates them to some degree. I don't know what it is, but to some degree he inoculates them because we are somewhat owning their depravity, right?
Yes.
That's what this does. We somewhat own their depravity. By the way, did you see David Sachs, who's the most right-wing guy in that podcast, was like, wow, kind of stepped away like, we're doing that? Okay. And it was the left-wing guys on the podcast. They were like, oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's the thing that if this is what happens. If you do not Harrison Butker or coach, is it Mazzulla? Is that the coach at the Celtics? Who's the Celtics coach?
Yeah.
Oh, Joe.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. If we don't do, it's Joe Mazzulla, right?
Yeah.
If we don't do Harrison Butker and Joe Mazzulla or Trump 2016, where I'm just drawing major lines to differentiate myself from the other side, then people are going to be like, well, I mean, if people have a tendency, they've proven this in national election after national election after national election, the strategy never works. They'll just go with the Democrats then. If we're going to accept their premise, they'll just go with, if we're going to just accept, a much lesser form of the doctrines of demons, I'll just go ahead and go with the doctrines of demons then. I'll just do that. It never works. That messaging on immigration won't work. Ask Presidents Mitt McCain. It doesn't work. No new taxes, but now that I'm president, here's the largest tax increase ever. The guy who did that, by the way, became the first ever wartime victorious president in American history to lose the next election. It doesn't work. You cannot do that. What was successful for Trump in 2016 and befuddled us on the Cruz campaign, we were convinced we had the most right-wing based candidate. We don't know what the word was back then, but that's the word we use now. We were convinced we had the most right-wing based candidate in the race, and Trump got to our right on every single issue. And then he would go out there and just say the most inflammatory things against Hillary, and some of them went too far. But by and large, he was drawing very sharp contrast between him and his opponent. Did he win? Yeah.
Against Hillary, yes.
Beat 23 Republican candidates for the nomination and then beat Hillary Clinton, running for Obama's third term. This campaign is much more like Romney 2012, where I'm not going to really take a lot of defined positions on a regular basis on a lot of things, but I'm just going to have a more based persona while I'm doing it. I think you may disagree. You're welcome to that opinion. I think we desperately need him to win here. And I just don't think that wins, because it's never won before. And I think that we have to use the old Ronald Reagan line, we must draw bold colors, not pale pastels. So you have Biden out there today just crushing Trump on the 2-year anniversary of Roe v. Wade. I haven't seen it yet. Has Trump released a statement taking credit for it? One of the great accomplishments of his presidency.
I haven't seen anything.
I returned the power of the law back to the people where it belongs. The Supreme Court doesn't have the power to make the law. The Supreme Court doesn't have the power to determine, determine outside of elections what people should think or stand for. I didn't even make a point about pro-life, did I? When I just said that, right? He could make all those points, right? Nothing. I've heard nothing. Maybe something's come, but I have not seen it. That's what I'm talking about. At some point, if you don't draw distinctions between you and your opponent, people have shown throughout history they'll just vote for the opponent. Maybe this will be an exception. We've had a lot of exceptions in this era, but it would be an exception nonetheless. So we were just talking about giving green cards to, hey, I'm going to Columbia University and majoring in Hamas studies. Thankfully, there is still one university out there less concerned with indoctrination than it is critical thinking. Still not just standing by, but actively acting upon its founding mission. And that's our friends over at Hillsdale College. Hillsdale's founding document in 1844 said the mission was to offer the kind of serious liberal, small l, liberal arts education needed to preserve the blessings of civil and religious liberty across the land. And that's the mission that continues to guide Hillsdale College to this very day. You can learn more about Hillsdale when you go to daceforhillsdale.com. That's F-O-R. Daceforhillsdale.com. There you're going to find a short video, just over a minute long, showing how Hillsdale's work not only on its original Michigan campus, but also in Washington, D.C., where it has a campus there. And then its work across the country is effective in defending American liberty. So take some time to watch today at daceforhillsdale.com. Again, that's daceforhillsdale.com. Let's welcome in our good friend Bob Vander Plaats from the Family Leader. Good to see you, brother. How are you?
Doing really well. Prayers for those up in my home territory, Northwest Iowa. I don't know if you've been watching, but just inundated with water. It's a real-time flood, and that community pretty much got destroyed. So
yeah,
prayers for those guys.
Our son-in-law, as you know, is from that part of the state. And his parents were supposed to come down to see our grandbaby Autumn this weekend and could not get out of town.
Yeah.
I mean, they've got 6 feet of water in their basement. A water main or something broke up there or something?
Water main broke, but a water levee broke. Levees broke. They're out of water. I talked to my father-in-law this morning. Can't take a shower yet. It's not good stuff. That's not, the entire Northwest Iowa region has just been inundated with rain. And it's a little bit ironic. I'm watering my yard here in central Iowa, and they're dealing with all the flooding up in Northwest Iowa.
Yeah, that's a good word for sure. Okay, in our overtime today, I've got a Twitter poll, and the results are final. And we're going to discuss these results and what we think as a show in the overtime today. I asked our Twitter following, if you were advising Trump in this debate on Thursday, would you advise him? And the two options were A, go on the attack and try to rattle Biden so that his dementia is more likely to manifest itself, but that risks making Biden appear sympathetic. That's kind of what happened in their first debate back in 2020. Or would you kind of just sit back and have Biden talk as much as possible to let it kind of just naturally come to the surface? But that risks that the White House apothecary has at least one more Dr. Feel-Good dose in him. Okay, and he's able to, do that thing where you can tell the injection was good because when that happens, he doesn't blink for like an hour. Okay, so we have those results. We're going to discuss those results from our Twitter following. Huh?
Did you want them now or not?
Not now.
Okay.
We'll save them for the overtime. Thank you for asking. And we'll save those for the OT, and then we're going to discuss them amongst ourselves. But if you were advising the former president on what to do Thursday night, what would your advice be?
It'd be the same as it was back in 2020 before the first debate. I just think Donald Trump needs to show, listen, I'm the president. I'm the alpha male in the room. He may be on stage, but I'm really not going to pay attention or recognize him that much. But I'm going to talk to the country. And I'm going to cast a vision for the country. I'm going to hearken on, are you better off today or you were better off under my administration, much like Ronald Reagan did? Are you better off 4 years ago or today? And so I think what it needs to be is that he needs to keep casting that vision. I was the president. Take a look at all the people surrounding my campaign right now as they know I built the economy once. I'll rebuild it again. We need to get past this stuff. I think the more attention he pays to Biden, the more, as you said, the sympathy factor will be there. I think it's more advantage Biden. I would keep talking to the American people like I'm the president. I'm going to be your next president. Everybody knows this guy's not going to be your next president. So I'm your only choice on the stage.
There is there's been increasing talk within their media circles about how big of a moment this is for Biden. I saw over the weekend even Van Jones came out and said if Biden mentally stumbles here, he's just done. Yeah. And I think there's a lot on the line for Joe Biden, but and I want to be wrong about this, but I kind of think this is a win-win for the Democratic Party. And here's what I mean by that. And tell me if you agree or disagree. if he goes out there, the expectations right now for him,
super low.
Yeah. I mean, the expectations, it's like you don't expect, it's like asking Lindsey Graham not to swipe right on Grindr on a Friday night. I mean, the expectations are that's happening at least once, right? You know. So
no, I don't. Go ahead.
I need it like that. I do that to Todd all the time, and he gets mad. I want to do that to somebody else for once.
I'm not mad, but like, you know what? Let's move past this one.
All right, let's just say the expectations for Biden are low.
Sure.
If he does, and man, they put him in lockdown for days. And that tells me that, I mean, they're around that cauldron, man, you know, eye of newt, wing of bat, you know. I mean, they're figuring out what will work, okay, to see if they can inject some life in the old lady yet, all right? If that happens, he walks away, does no more debates, says, hey, yeah, I proved my point. And I don't, and by then because by the next time they'll debate, they'll have sentenced Trump as a felon, likely to some form of incarceration. Mm-hmm. He can just say, I'm not debating prisoners. I'm not debating Trump from Mar-a-Lago at house arrest or from Trump Tower over Zoom. You know, we already had our debate. You guys clearly saw who won. You see what I'm saying?
Sure. Okay.
Or if he does what I think is way more likely, because his rate of decline is becoming exceedingly obvious to the point that however far down they are in their spin for responding to it, that they got to cheap fakes, indicates how far down the list we are, that they're running out of things to throw out there to gaslight people. Mm-hmm. And so if he does indeed demonstrate that he's an 80-year-old man with dementia, which he is, they've got 2 full months until the Democratic convention to give a guy a gold watch. I had a good buddy of mine say, well, there's no mechanism, who's a smart guy. Well, there's no mechanism in the Democratic Party for getting rid of him. And I wrote back to him, I texted back to him, in the Democratic, they're not like us. The will to power is the mechanism. You see what I'm saying? Like it doesn't matter if there's we've watched them. We watched there in Iowa on real time with cameras rolling at their caucuses. The app stopped working because Bernie Sanders was going to win. They just do whatever they want. It's not like us. There's no rules. There's no process. And they even created this thing called super delegates just in case the crazies get the candidate they want and they don't want to nominate that person.
Well, super.
Yeah, we'll just give them the person we want. Okay, so they don't need a process. The process is will to power. They've got 2 months to hand him a gold watch, say, hey, you can go ahead and pardon Hunter before his next trial in September, and he's sentenced to prison then, and just have an open convention. And as long as they come out of that without someone who's a straight white male, which they would, then they can also bypass Kamala, because there'll be some form of intersectionality group that will, woke group that will get their box checked. And they'll just, somebody like a Hakeem Jeffries or somebody like that. And it's a fresh face to give the American people. And they've got 2 months to plan this. Like, I don't think this is they can lose here. I think Biden can lose a lot, but I don't think the Democrats can lose it all. Please tell me I'm wrong.
Well, let me go back a little bit. I just think this presidential election was all good fodder and banter for shows like this or others to say, let's just talk about the presidential debate, the presidential election. And my whole thought process was, Biden's a non-issue. They could put a broomstick up there, because what it is, it's all about, do you want to vote for Trump or do you want to vote against Trump? However, today, Biden has proven just how bad he is and the disastrous leadership that he's executing at this point. And Biden's not good either. Take a look at all the Hunter Biden stuff. So it's like, if you're looking for the moral superior here, I'm not so sure you have the moral superior. So now I think Biden is a factor. And if Biden is propped up by the jukebox, effectively.
Great country song, by the way.
I think it is. I think it is a win by going, I'm not going to debate him again. I pointed out all the bad. If he fails, like a lot of us think he is, I think a lot of Democrats believe this is not a good environment for him to be in, but we're going to force him into that environment early so we have enough time to respond. If he does what everybody thinks he's going to do, then I think that's a win as well. I think Biden's biggest issue is going to be if it's debate one of 2020 but reverse, where he tries to go after Trump and basically proves to the American people this is a complete weaponization of my government against this guy because he's orange man bad all the time. So win-win, probably. If Biden really shows their hand, if he really utters the code red, this is what we're about and this is what we're doing, then I think they lose.
All right. I want to switch topics with you. and I want to talk about election fraud. Okay.
Okay.
Aaron and Todd, how many shows have we done with discussing the Dominion flowchart?
The
corporate
Dominion
flowchart. Corporate flowcharts. Who's working for whom? Which country? 0.
That would be
we did like an interview, I want to say, with Admiral Robinson the day she was at the event. Mike Lindell, thank you. Said he was going to come out with the evidence that China hacked the election. We did interview her when she was at that symposium, right? But other than that, how much of that information have we entertained on this show?
Very little.
None seriously. It's made for a laugh track of sorts, but none seriously.
And then who was it that got the entire Blaze media channel demonetized on Facebook for calling out the shenanigans of the 2020 election the day after the election? Who was that?
That
was me. Okay. So we've done a ton of stuff on election fraud, but we haven't really done any of this rabbit trail chasing of fantastical tales. We haven't released any Krakens, right? None?
No.
Okay. Here's why. All right. I want you. Somebody show me what the. Can someone show me what the odds of this are? All right. So in the 2022 midterms, the Real Clear Politics polling average and the 538 forecast almost nailed exactly what the margin of victory was going to be on the generic ballot for Republicans. Okay. So we're talking dozens of Senate races, 435 House races. That's a lot of polling. Okay, these are. We're talking about places from rural Wyoming to suburban Orange County to Miami-Dade to Bangor, Maine. Okay, a lot of diverse
the
populations.
Science works. They nailed it.
Yep, absolutely nailed what the final mark of victory was going to be for the Republicans on the congressional ballot. Okay, on the generic congressional ballot, and understand the 538 forecast is their summation of all the aggregate of all the polls they've taken or that have been taken in public media. The Real Clear Politics polling average is an aggregation of all the polls that have been taken. So we're not talking 2 sources. We're talking more like well over 20 sources aggregated by these 2 sites into forecasts. And they got the broader electorate correct. The one that has the most margin for error and discrepancy when we're dealing with these many populations and these many outcomes across a broad, diverse country. They nailed that, okay? All right. But then there were the individual races that ended up being the most determinative in who had control. And a weird trend happens when you look at that, when you look at those races. Let's look at them, shall we? The final 538 2022 Pennsylvania Senate forecast had Oz by 0.5. The actual result was Fetterman by 5. The 2022
by 0.5, right?
By 5.
By 5.
Yes. The 2022 final RCP average for Michigan governor had Whitmer by 1. She won by 10. The final 538 Senate forecast had Ron Johnson winning by 3.3. He won by barely 1. The final RCP forecast of the Arizona Senate had Masters winning by 0.3. He actually lost by 4.9. The final 538 Arizona governor forecast had Kari Lake winning by 2.4. Katie Hobbs won by 0.7. And the final RCP average, by the way, that was the 538 forecast on Kari Lake, not RCP. The final RCP average for Nevada Senate had Laxalt winning by 3.5. Cortez Masto won by 0.9. What are the odds? Someone tell me what the odds are that these polls in an aggregate are going to nail the broader electorate where there's more diverse outcomes. at least in the House, 435 separate elections, dozens in the Senate. They're going to nail that. But in the half dozen races I just cited here that were the most determinative in the 2022 election, those were the ones they were all wrong, and they were all wrong in one direction. Do you guys know what the odds of that are? Go out on your roof on a sunny day, jump up and down, and try to get struck by lightning. Those kinds of odds. Bob, your thoughts?
And not only were they wrong, but they were wrong by significant margins. So Kari Lake, for example, is supposed to win by 2.4. Hobbs wins by 0.7. That's well over 3 percentage points where they're off on. Fetterman, you talked about.
They're off by almost 6 points in that race.
Dr. Oz.
Yep.
The key is, Steve, I think what you see is that something stinks in River City here. But what are you going to do about it now as you go into 2024? That's my thing. What's the GOP doing about it in 2024? What's Trump doing about it in 2024? If you know These are the states that are going to determine the presidential election or the balance of power in Congress. What are you doing in these states right now to make sure that does not happen? What are the checks and balances? Because what is going to happen is that if we scream again after Election Day, we feed right into the narrative that Biden and Harris want us to have, and that's say the federal government needs to take over our elections. That's exactly what they want. You need to ensure integrity in the states, but if you know there's a potential fraud in Arizona, in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, in Montana, places where there's going to be determining races, what are you doing about it now to make sure that there's a paper trail backup to say this vote is one that we can trust, or we're going to challenge this vote and have real evidence to challenge it?
Do you guys have thoughts on how a bunch of polls that typically favor Democrats manage to nail a very broad, diverse midterm overall electorate, but somehow undersampled Democrats in every single one of the half dozen races that most determine the outcome of the same midterms that they broadly were correct on?
My only thought is the very fact that this debate is happening at all is a clear sign that they think they can pull that kind of thing off again.
I'll just repeat what I've always said. When it comes to 2020, it is without a shadow of a doubt. I think it's just objectively true. Dialed up to 11 compared to where it usually is, that the elections were rigged, stolen, after the fact. That's much more difficult to prove. When it comes to 2022 and the data that you just rattled off there, Steve, they just got a really good turnout operation, apparently, in those races.
It's pretty clear whatever they did in 2020, whatever they did there, where Joe Biden won one of the traditional bellwether counties, won one, and still ended up winning the election, and just so happened to get very slim vote totals in the handful of counties in the most decisive states that he needed in order to get to the electoral college vote threshold. Okay, whatever they did there, it's very clear this carried over to 2022, and this is carried over into the midterms and the off years. They have blown us out in turnout in all these off year, special elections all over the country. They clearly now have some form of turnout operation that either the polls aren't accounting for or the polls are lying to us about. One of the two.
And the turnout,
I'll give you the last word. I got 30 seconds.
The turnout operation, Steve, is one that it's not legal. But the thing is, when you know that is the case, what are you going to do about it? If Michigan knows, Wisconsin's going to cheat here, what are you going to do to make sure that Wisconsin doesn't cheat? In 2020, when Trump was doing
we got to go.
Yeah, when Trump was doing all the rallies saying there's going to be fraud, what are you going to do when you're in charge of the departments to make sure there's not fraud?
All right, back here with Hour 2, live and on demand on Blaze TV, radio, and podcast. I'm Steve Deace with Todd Erzin and Aaron McIntyre and all of you. And you can all, though hopefully not all at once, let us know what you think about what we think via the stevedeace.com inbox. Do so by emailing us, steve@stevedeace.com. You can also find us on Facebook, MeWe, and Gab. You can follow us at Steve Deace Show on X, Instagram, and TikTok. And then don't forget, if you're a podcast listener, if you wouldn't mind, please leave us a 5-star review. We'd love to get over 10,000 of those on iTunes this year. I have no idea why. I just think it's a nice round number. We appreciate each and every one of those. You can also hit subscribe, or if you are tuned in via iTunes, that's follow. And that way, every time we do a new episode, it shows up in your podcast feed every single time. Relief Factor also would like to show up and see if they might be the answer to the chronic pain that maybe you just kind of have given up on. And this is going to be my lot in life. This lingering soreness, achiness, stiffness, just I'm stuck with it. Might be the case. Again, I mean, we all die. We all get old. Okay. Our joints don't get younger. It's not the way this works. But, 70% of the time, and we're talking a sample of well over 1 million people, 70% of the time, those who've tried the 3-week quick start from Relief Factor have seen such great results that they stuck around long term. It's only $20. So why not try a supplement created by physicians who can prescribe drugs, but it's drug-free, so they don't anticipate any side effects here, like you get from drugs that kind of mask your pain. Now they want to go after the inflammation that's causing it. And they want to do, that's what Relief Factor wants to do. For $20, what do you got to lose? To see if you don't see a difference in your pain level in 3 weeks or less when you go to relieffactor.com. That's relieffactor.com. Head over there now, relieffactor.com. All right, this hour, I wanted us to take some time to see if we could get out ahead of the next potential scamdemic. This is a video produced by our good buddy Dr. Peter McCullough and John Leake, whom he wrote his book with a couple of years ago on, I think it's The Courage to Treat or something, I think is what that was called, right? About their battle against COVID-19. And John Leake's a longtime investigative reporter. And so he's going to be a part of this video as well with Peter McCullough. I thought rather than the three of us trying to, pick and choose the segments we should talk about, why don't we just, I've got a novel idea. Let's do this. Why don't we have medical professionals that might even have differing opinions from others? Why don't we just let them talk? Thoughts?
Yeah.
Why don't we just try this whole wisdom in a multitude of counsel thing and see what we come up with?
Have I taught you anything about the magical power of vaccines over all these years?
Yeah, I mean, if we can e pluribus unum this thing too, maybe. I don't know. Let's, out of many one, So that's what we're going to do. We're actually going to play this video in its entirety. It'll begin with a montage of clips attempting to scare the heck out of you about bird flu. All right. And some of this will be familiar language you've heard before. And then you're going to hear Dr. Peter McCullough try to separate fact from fiction on the tail end of this. It's about 20 minutes. Make sure to focus on this and watch.
Current avian influenza virus strains have been circulating and diversifying in wild bird populations for at least the last 100 years. The practice of exterminating animals to prevent disease spread, with government compensation, has been in use for centuries. Yet, with the advent of PCR testing, the risk of false positives can lead to unnecessary animal exterminations.
If they could find this virus in you at all, and with PCR, if you do it well, you can find almost anything in anybody. So that could be thought of as a misuse of it, just to claim that it's meaningful. But it doesn't tell you that you're sick, and it doesn't tell you that the thing you ended up with really was going to hurt you or anything like that.
Since the H5N1 bird flu outbreak began in late 2020, millions of healthy chickens have been culled in an attempt to prevent spread. The conventional practice involves culling all of the birds in a facility in which the virus is detected. The frequently stated rationale for this practice is that highly pathogenic avian influenza has a mortality rate of 90% of domesticated poultry, often within 48 hours, so that one might as well destroy the entire flock and start over with an entirely new one. Often using inhumane methods such as ventilation shutdown.
Ventilation shutdown is the killing of animals by shutting off vents to basically suffocate animals. Ventilation shutdown plus adds carbon dioxide or heat, which only increases the suffering of the animals.
Or foam depopulation, which involves spraying birds with foam to suffocate them. The U.S. government incentivizes this practice, known as depop, by reimbursing the farmer for all culled birds, but not for birds that die of influenza. Because this has long been the conventional practice, there is zero financial motive to wait and see if the virus is indeed as pathogenic as claimed. Currently, there is an urgent need to conduct research on the alternative practice of waiting to see if some percentage of the flock survives and develops herd immunity. The unnecessary culling of millions of healthy animals can lead to food supply chain collapse, resulting in catastrophic consequences.
Its latest news report, the USDA shows large egg prices around the nation have jumped.
Melbourne shoppers are being told to brace for egg supply shortages for up to a year as the bird flu crisis unfolds.
It's thought it's families with children who are struggling the most. As this graph shows, since April, food insecurity has increased more amongst this group compared to households without children.
Scientific evidence shows that culling entire flocks may not be necessary, as H5N1 doesn't kill every chicken it infects. Instead, flocks should be given a chance to recover and obtain natural immunity against the virus. Studies on this observation method are urgently needed to prevent millions of unnecessary animal deaths. As was recently reported in the New York Times, some animal welfare advocates, pointing to recent outbreaks that were allowed to run their course, question whether killing every bird on an affected farm is even the right approach. When H5N1 hit Harvest Home Animal Sanctuary in California in February 2023, killing 3 birds, the farm's operators steeled themselves for a state-mandated culling. Instead, California agriculture officials, citing a recently created exemption for farms that do not produce food, said they would spare the birds as long as strict quarantine measures were put in place for 120 days. Over the next few weeks, the virus claimed 26 of the farm's 160 chickens, ducks, and turkeys, but the others survived, even those that had appeared visibly ill, according to Christine Morrissey, the sanctuary's executive director. She said the experience suggested that mass cullings might be unnecessary. There needs to be more research and effort put into finding other ways of responding to this virus, Ms. Morrissey said, because depopulation is horrifying and it's not solving the problem at hand. Cattle currently exhibit a very low mortality rate from H5N1, yet unscrupulous actors might push for policies that mandate the culling of infected cows.
Nobody knows how to get rid of
how to get cows to stop farting.
Exactly, or burping. And so there is artificial meat. If it was a 50% reduction, then you could ignore, okay, leave the cows alone. But because we're trying to avoid the temperature continuing to go up, you do need to go to zero. We need to change cows, just cows alone.
How are we going to do that?
Well, we'll have to prepare for the next one. That, I'd say is will get attention this time.
We know what's next. We're going to have zoonotic influenza illness. So, put your tray tables in the upright position and your seats forward and your seatbelts on, because this is unfortunately a new wave of pandemics is going to be upon us.
I'm obviously most worried about bird flu, but in the laboratory, I could make it highly infectious for humans in months, because it's been published the 5 amino acids that I need to change. And so I don't think that research should be done. That's the real threat. That's the real biosecurity threat, that these university labs are doing these bio experiments that are intentionally modifying viruses. And bird flu, I think, is going to be the cause of the great pandemic.
Naturally occurring HPAI, H5N1 viruses cause a reported almost 60% mortality in humans, which triggered a concern, understandably, clearly, that if you give a gain of function of a pathogenic virus to make it more transmissible, that's a whole different story. There were studies done by 2 NIAID-funded investigators, Ron Fouché and Yoshi Kawaoka, in which H5N1, a strain from Indonesia and a strain from Vietnam, were altered in a gain of function, either by direct mutation or by reassortment. And by passage in ferrets, the mammal model for this virus for humans, there was an increase in fact, a development of aerosol transmissibility in a mammal, which this particular virus did not have. Because of that, this triggered concern. NSABB recommended that the general conclusions highlighting the novel outcome be published, but the manuscript did not include methodologic and other details that could enable replication of the experiments by those who would seek to do harm. What also was discussed that might accidentally be released.
We should be testing every cow weekly. You can do pooled PCR.
We do know that global energy systems, food systems, and supply chains will be deeply affected.
The Gates Foundation gave $9.5 million to UW-Madison and principal investigator Yoshihiro Kawaka to modify H5N1 viruses to preferentially recognize human-type receptors and transmit efficiently in mammals. The current USDA Deputy Chief of Staff is a former Gates Foundation Senior Program Officer for Private Sector Partnerships. Her former employer wishes to transition meat consumption to 100% synthetic. In 2023, the USDA approved Bill Gates-backed laboratory-made chicken created by Upside Foods. Serial passage, gain of function of H5NX clade 2.3.4.4 viruses in mallard ducks is currently underway at the USDA Southeast Poultry Research Laboratory in Athens, Georgia. We are highly suspicious that H5N1 clade 2.3.4.4b, genotype B1, may have leaked or was released from the USDA Southeast Poultry Research Laboratory, leading to the current outbreaks.
In review of this video that we've just watched, I think it breaks down neatly into 6 areas of concern. Doctor, what is your current thinking here on June the 16th with area of concern 1, culling?
The goal of culling was to eradicate avian influenza, to just snuff it out. Well, this is, the genie's out of the bottle here, John. This is spreading from hen house to hen house. At this point in time, I think culling ought to be challenged, and farmers should consider not culling all their birds. Remember, that disrupts their workflow, particularly egg-laying hens, which have no contact with any other birds. That'd be the first group I would suggest not culling, and to look at survival from the current strain of avian influenza.
You know, this whole enterprise of culling comports with the Great Reset agenda of reducing human consumption of animal protein. I think that's something we should be aware of, particularly as we examine point number 2 in this, the purported expansion of the host range of this virus into mammals, most notably marine mammals and cattle. We've seen in the video that Mr. Bill Gates and some of his Great Reset companions would like to reduce human consumption of beef. What are your thoughts about this purported expansion of the latest clade's host range into mammals?
In a review by Abdul Wade and colleagues, to just orient our viewers, humans can get influenza A, B, and C, okay? Birds can get influenza A. Now, beyond that, influenza B, pigs and seals, additionally, influenza C, pigs, influenza D in cattle, but we haven't seen influenza A go into these other species. And John, it suggests the work of potentially gain of function research through serial passage to get it to pass from a bird potentially to a mammal. And we're highly suspicious that this could have occurred at the USDA Poultry Research Center in Athens, Georgia, or in academic laboratories all over the world. But expanded host range is unlikely to have occurred in nature without human agency.
What are we to make of these reports, which are very alarming? We see reports illustrated with photographs of multiple dead elephant seals as far south as Tierra del Fuego, or harbor seals in Massachusetts. We're seeing increasing reports of this. We all know that marine mammals are closer to humans. How are we supposed to interpret these alarming reports of dead marine mammals?
If we saw these 10 or 20 years ago, the putative cause could have been a toxic algae bloom or some other cause. I wouldn't trust the PCR test alone. Scientists using the PCR test on dead animals, the virus could be there, just coexisting, may not be pathogenic. We really need to see autopsies of these animals in chest x-rays and really understand, did they have a mammalian form of bird flu or did they not? We simply can't trust the PCR alone.
Okay, let's briefly touch on this questionable proposition that along with expanded or increased transmissibility and host range, we're also seeing increased virulence. This seems to fly in the face of conventional virology theory. Any thoughts on that?
This was our, our third point, John. And it goes back to the work of Theobald Smith, 1904, who said, listen, if a virus is going to survive, it can't kill all of its hosts. It's never going to be able to transmit. So as it moves from host to host, it's got to keep some of the hosts alive. And so it can't be that virulent. Otherwise, the existence of the virus would, in a sense, it would terminate itself. Now that moves all the way forward to what we saw through the SARS-CoV-2 outbreak, where, as COVID just existed over the course of years, even to today, we saw what's called Mueller's ratchet, that as the virus moves through its evolutionary outbreak course, it becomes less virulent. And COVID's a less serious infection. Interestingly, with SARS-1 and MERS, it had reduced human-to-human transmission, but a lot more virulence. And so those two outbreaks burned out on their own, but COVID continues. So the concern here is that with the current strain of bird flu, is that it is propagating across the country, but our careful observation is that we're not seeing large numbers of dead birds, for instance, at ponds or on farms. We're not hearing about large numbers of bird deaths in zoos, which we would hear about that with other viral infections like West Nile virus, for example. So I think at this point in time, my gut feeling is that the current strain circulating is more transmissible, but less serious, less deadly.
Okay, point number 4 is something that we've been talking about a lot. It would seem that the probable goal of this media campaign about this new clade of H5N1 bird flu is fear-mongering with a likely objective of unloading lots of new H5N1 vaccines on the governments of the world. That seems to be the game afoot. Any thoughts on how this could be just a matter of fear-mongering with the objective of selling vaccines to governments?
And boy, our government is already involved in this. Peter Marks, who directs this area within the NIH, has been on Capitol Hill saying the U.S. already has 3 vaccines. They have the CSL Audens antigen-based vaccine. They must be alluding to the CSL self-replicating messenger RNA vaccine and the CEPI Gates Foundation Korean self-amplifying messenger RNA vaccines. Now, these are all vaccines for humans, and we haven't seen large numbers of human cases. Despite that, John, fear has driven the European Union to pull the trigger on 40 million vaccine doses of bird flu for humans. I thoroughly expect our U.S. government is shortly announcing a large purchase of human vaccines in the United States. And we'll see, for instance, Nirav Shah, our CDC director, who's already advising mass PCR testing of farm workers. Before you know it, I believe both the CDC and FDA will be advising mass vaccination of farm workers and others in this fear-driven frenzy that leads to mass human vaccination.
Yes, and just to add, we've seen in China mass vaccination of domesticated poultry. And as the recent paper out of the University of Georgia points out, the preceding variant to the latest, H5NX, it was called, there's quite a bit of evidence that mutation, that variant, actually emerged as a direct result of mass vaccinating poultry in China with a leaky vaccine. That is to say, it did not prevent transmission and infection. So I think that the evidence we're looking at thus far suggests that any kind of mass vaccination, whether it be animals or humans, is not indicated at this point. We look at number 5, and I think this is the wild card, gain of function. laboratory manipulation of this virus, of this latest variant. We've seen this is the hot topic to this day on Capitol Hill with respect to SARS-CoV-2. The thing that I'm observing here is we've already talked about this current clade seems to have been manipulated in a lab to amplify its transmissibility and its host range. There's also concern that we saw in our video with the possibility that the kinds of experiments that Fouchier and Kawaoka were performing that did cause alarm. The question is, has this kind of work been resumed? Can this kind of work pose a more specific threat to human health? What are your thoughts about gain of function?
The video clearly shows Anthony Fauci describing the goals of gain of function research by Dr. Kawaoka in Wisconsin, Dr. Ron Fouchier at Erasmus in the Netherlands, were in their papers, and I've read it. They're essentially, their goal is to get human to human spread. Fauci thinks it's so dangerous that the methods of their papers should not be disclosed. So those with nefarious intentions could not, in a sense, create another biological threat. But Redfield, former CDC director, says that is the imminent threat, John. The imminent threat is a strain that can jump from human to human. And everybody should be watching for reports where this is happening, John. Gain of function research looks like it's up to no good across the board. We previously had a pause on gain of function research just on federal funding, 2014 to 2017, John, but that's not enough. Gain of function research on US soil, in my view, should be completely banned. We should have no more of it. Our institutional review boards and similar bodies should reject any of these proposals. There should be no funding for this research, not just federal, but all forms of funding. I think gain of function research is going to dial up another global pandemic.
Well, and you mentioned U.S. soil. Remember, the poultry laboratory in Athens, Georgia, announced in 2021, they're not only performing these experiments in their lab in Athens, Georgia, their research partner in China is part of this same endeavor. So here we are, once again, we have American biotechnicians working with their colleagues in China. So I would go one step further. American biotechnology cannot be transferred to Chinese colleagues either.
It's true. We really need a global ban on gain of function research, and it needs to have some real bite to it, John. We're talking federal fines or imprisonment for the exchange of this type of very dangerous biotechnology. It's almost like transferring knowledge on the development of a nuclear weapon or something worse.
Number 6, the importance of being prepared. As if we've learned nothing in the last 4 years, it's difficult to predict how these things are going to play out, especially when we're talking about the wild card of human manipulation and agency. Tell us about the importance of being prepared.
Our analysis right now, John, and no one really knows what's going to happen, but I think this is the best distillation, that preparedness for bird flu is not animal vaccination. It's not human vaccination. It's not hazmat suits or masks. It's actually being prepared if one has direct contact or gets sick with highly pathogenic avian influenza. We're talking about dilute iodine nasal sprays and gargles every 4 hours. A very dilute iodine drop can be made at home that's safe. And because we know the eyes have been a source of acquisition of the virus, at least in the small number of human cases so far, which have been non-serious. We have oral antivirals like Tamiflu and 3 others, even an intravenous one, and the ability to cover for secondary infections with antibiotics. We've never had a human death of bird flu in America. That's because we have very good treatments for influenza. I believe the stated previous human mortality rate from avian influenza largely is a reflection of very poor standards of medical care in Southeast Asia, where most of the cases have arisen, John. So preparedness, again, means the use of nasal sprays, gargles, drops as a way to, in a sense, neutralize the virus after contact and reduce the viral burden with infection. And then we move on to standard of care influenza treatment.
And you mentioned earlier the importance of antibiotics for secondary bacterial infections. That seems to have been a real killer in the Spanish flu.
Yeah, that is certainly true. Influenza uniquely sets up the body for a staphylococcal pneumonia. You may wonder, where does the staph come? Large numbers of people have staphylococcus in their nasal passages. So as they inhale, the staphylococcal bacteria can go down to damaged lungs with influenza and cause staphylococcal pneumonia. I've seen it in my clinical practice, and it's a serious form of pneumonia. It needs antibiotics to treat it.
Okay, a lot of information there, but man, history doesn't just repeat, it rhymes. There are a lot of common threads there. Scattered about those 24 minutes or so, a lot of tropes we have heard before. So I want us to discuss those when we come back in a moment. Hopefully we can catch those tropes at their nascent stages. First, a word about our friends over at realestateagentsitrust.com. In these unprecedented times,
Bing.
Make sure that before you go into the Let's Go Brandon real estate market, you've got a real estate agent who knows what Let's Go Brandon means. Okay. And chances are that agent we refer you to is right from here within the Blaze audience, someone with a proven track record of success that's been vetted. Otherwise, we wouldn't recommend them. And they can get you to where you want to go, whether that's somewhere across the town you live or across the country, wherever you need to go. Make sure you've got an agent whose track record of success, fully verified, has the best practices, someone you can trust. Where would you find them? The name kind of says it all. realestateagentsitrust.com is where you want to go. Again, you want to head over to realestateagentsitrust.com. All right, I want to thank Peter McCullough and John Leake both for producing that video, and then Peter for passing it on to us. And I hope you guys found that as you were watching and or listening to that it was worth your time, because there are several things that I wrote down and pulled out of there going through it for a second time here with the rest of you that I think merit further conversation. So we're going to have that talk here in just a few moments when we come back. Stay tuned. All right, special announcement time, folks. Maybe a one-time opportunity for you to join me and our good friend Daniel Horowitz and Rick Green at his organization's Patriot Academy. They have built a unique firearms training program in Texas that provides handgun defense training with classroom training in the Constitution, civics, and culture. And not only is the firearms training some of the best in the country, but the fellowship and discussion time that you get during the class is also inspiring. And you always leave a Patriot Academy class refreshed and ready to keep up the good fight for freedom. That's why I'm excited to announce that Daniel and I, between the dates of November 16th and 18th, later this year, we're going to be hosting a special 3-day constitutional defense course at Patriot Academy's campus site just outside of Fredericksburg, Texas. This is going to be the first time the three of us will be able to do one of these together. It may even be the only time we'll be able to make it work, so you don't want to miss out. If you'd like to attend, all right, go to patriotacademy.com/Steve. Again, that's patriotacademy.com/Steve. You can bring your spouse, your kids, your friends, anyone else who loves the country and would like to spend a few days discussing with us the things that matter the most. Again, patriotacademy.com/Steve is where you want to go. Spots are limited, so register today at patriotacademy.com/Steve. All right, again, hat tip to our good friend Peter McCullough. Todd and Aaron, there are a few things I jotted down going through this with Peter again for the second time in real time here with the audience. Let's go through these because there are so many common threads here to the tropes we were subjected to during COVID. Let's start with this one. All right. We were told this was a novel coronavirus, right? That's what we were told about COVID-19. Mm-hmm. Okay. It is true that this particular strain of COVID was a novel virus. However, how often were you told, though, that coronaviruses have actually been around for centuries?
You weren't told that by anybody within
Correct.
the cyborg that
and that
us.
many of your common cold viruses actually began as pandemic coronaviruses, and then eventually, due to what McCullough talks about there, Muller's ratchet, ended up becoming endemic, forms of the cold. Yeah. Okay, or variations of the flu.
By the way, you weren't told should be an evergreen in terms of implied in everything you say. You weren't told.
Correct, because if they said it was a novel coronavirus, but you may have some form of immunity built into coronaviruses by the amount of cold viruses you've been exposed to over time, would we have had near the panic that we did? No. Similarly,
what the T-cell conversations we had about Asia way back in the day.
Yes. Correct. Yep. Natural immunity, that was the first sign that they clearly were lying, is the way that they just did everything they could to slander natural immunity, right? Did you catch what the video said at the very beginning? Bird flu has been circulating for over a century.
Yes.
Did you catch that part from the BBC? Yeah. Kind of makes it, because all the coverage you're seeing right now makes it look like this just showed up like a zombie virus. Thoughts?
Well, Steve, no one's going to like this, but it's just true. We're just dumber now than we've ever been. You couldn't have pulled this off on go back to 1950, far more agrarian, far less educated people, far poorer overall. You couldn't have pulled this off on that people because they were just smarter. We are so stupid and just want to be led. We're consumers. We're not citizens anymore. We've gone from going back to 1950, the things we're vaccinated for, just 1970, Steve, when you and I are babies. Mm-hmm. Something on a total of 17 to 70 shots, something like that. Yep. Folks, on this issue, we just have no common sense. It doesn't matter how many needles they tell you to plunge in your arm. You're going to do it because you're dumber now than your grandparents were in 1950. They would have looked at you and saw how animals survive, viruses go through, and said, man, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah, it's the information that is consumed by the vast majority of people in the West right now is the food equivalent of the slop that's eaten. What's the name of the Idiocracy character? He's just sitting there watching Al My Balls, just eating slop through a tube. Mm-hmm. That's the equivalent of the information, or our taste for information. That's what we desire in terms of, it's just slop. And we, as Todd said, are dumb.
You guys hear mass PCR testing being called for all over again? Again, this is
no lessons.
They're just rerunning. We're rerunning the playbook. Okay, what are the settings on those PCR tests? How many times are they going to magnify looking at the samples over and over again? I remember when my Facebook page and YouTube pages got shut down by both of those companies because I was quoting a New York Times article pointing out the outrageous levels of sensitivities of these PCR tests to find any literal, like almost archaeological level of remnant of COVID-19 into these samples, and how it was way beyond the level of PCR testing we've done in the past. How this kind of PCR testing, by the way, led people to think there was a pandemic in one case when there was not. We're doing it all over again on the PCR testing as well. Did you guys catch that?
Of course, and if memory serves, that guy in the video who's talking about it is one of the original inventors of the PCR test himself. So he knows wherever he speaks, and he's saying like this thing. When he said if you know what you're doing with these things, wink wink, which is like if you want to be the mad scientist,
you'll find whatever you want.
You can contrive whatever you want to.
Yep.
Which they did, and they do.
Aaron, what I thought was fascinating watching this for the second time is, were we seeing competing cults here during one instance where the BBC is advocating for not culling birds, But are they doing it from the right premise? Meaning, are they doing it from data, or is this kind of animal rights cultic activity? And then on the other side of this, you have the public health people. We have to cull the birds. We got to PCR test everybody and everything else. How much of this, how much of either of these instincts, which are usually united, these two groups are, but they're at odds with one another, how much of it is driven by data as opposed to their narrative, right? The animal rights people don't want to see the chickens killed. And on the other hand, you've got the WEF public health people that are trying to get us to stop eating animal protein. You see what I'm saying?
Well, this is the whole ball game right here, because at the very beginning, the mouth of the river, if you will, starts with the premise that we can control viruses.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
well, we can control the weather. At least Ron DeSantis supposedly can.
See, that is the whole ball game here. And that's a very meta observation, but it's a very granular application, because even though we've not been taught credos, Jose, can you see by say, can you say? I should say it is becoming increasingly Jose, but say, can you see? We learn all of these credence. I pledge allegiance to the flag. If you went to a Christian school, I'm sure you've learned several verses. How many of us have learned the credo? You can control viruses, like those exact words. None of us. That's not really taught. But yet every time we put on a mask, every time we get jabbed for anything, that's the premise that we're accepting. And it's just a faulty premise. It's just a terrible premise. It is the dam upstream. It's a really bad old dam that's falling apart at the top of the river, or at the mouth of the river, near upstream of the river. And that dam is falling apart, and we see the damage that notion, that premise that we can control viruses, we see the damage that does, because then a mask can control a virus. This jab can control a virus. 6 feet of separation can control a virus. Mm-hmm. And it is interesting. You're seeing which cults are actually...
be like God.
Yeah, you're seeing which cults are actually more powerful, because which cult is winning right now? It's the controlling viruses cult right now, because PETA is a joke, really, for the most part, across the board.
But let's take both. Here's an important point, because it's in there. Maybe you'll get to this. But let's say those two cults authentically are diehard believers. All right? What else is in there about it's? Can they manipulate all of us on their own? It's the money, guys. He says they don't even consider not letting the herd survive a little and seeing how this goes because of the financial incentive of the government. We're living in a time where these cults can be manipulated de jour by basically Bond villains, is what we have now.
Right. That everything's based on your narrative and the desired outcome, not on actual data.
And when the rest of the culture constantly tells you in other areas there's just too much money, you just have to understand that's how things go. That's how it works with this too, more than ever.
What Peter is describing when they get into the conversation, when John Leake and Peter McCullough get into gain of function research, what he is calling human agency, or you trying to provoke these viruses to a particular outcome to find out what would cause them to spill over into a mammal/human. We addressed this in Faucian Bargain, by the way, and this is I think one of the most underrated or underreported angles in this entire debate about the origins of the virus. It's not just that they were doing gain of function research, but they were doing something specifically to, and we use this phrase, if you read Faucian Bargain, I'm guessing it's probably the first time you've heard the phrase. Spillover potential. They were specifically provoking these viruses, these bat coronaviruses, in the labs in Wuhan, which again is not some rural outpost, but a densely populated area. There's multiples of these labs in this area. It's one of the most densely populated in the world. They were specifically provoking them to spill over into humans to see what would happen. So it's not just, and I've used this analogy before, I'll use it again. It's not just, hey, we're going to drop the atom bomb on the Bikini Atoll and to test it. It's now, let's put a human being in the blast radius and find out what the radiation does to them. That's what they were doing here, okay? That's when you want to talk about playing God, all right? That's exactly what they were doing. And what Peter is alluding to here is there's evidence given by how quickly this has emerged. There's evidence of, quote, human agency again, that these, again, were manufactured for an outcome to see what would happen.
And they're still doing it post-COVID, per my alma mater, University of Wisconsin. No lessons learned. Again, what's the most logical reason for it? It's the combination of things I've talked about. Magical power vaccines with there's just too much money. We're the crackheads, guys.
Well, Peter alludes to this. This is a quote I jotted down from Peter. Quote, these are all vaccines for humans, yet we haven't seen a lot of human infections. And by the way, did you see the 4 little letters that these bird flu vaccines were? mRNA, all over again. By the way, and this is a point they don't make, but I wanted to connect this dot for you. If they just vaccinate the animals, if they inject the animals with the mRNA, it's basically injecting you. Because they're injecting the food supply. Do you see what I'm saying? That you're going to ingest.
When was the moment when the scientific community substituted exegesis of science, meaning we are trying to understand it in the way that it was meant to be understood?
It's an observable method.
An observable method.
That we need to then test.
Versus the eisegesis, I am putting my own...
I'm conjuring.
I'm putting my own preconceived notions into the science
Science
and then calling
is magic.
it science.
It's occultic. It's Gnostic.
When was the moment that happened?
I don't know that I can point to a singular moment, but it has definitely occurred in this generation for sure. It absolutely has. Now, it's happened in previous generations. It was called eugenics. At the turn of the century, the 20th century, it was called Nazi experimentation at the midway point of the last century. So it's occurred before in modern times, but it's just full-fledged. Pretty much that's all it is now, is a narrative now. I mean, Scientific American puts out a piece last week calling for federal guidelines for homeschooling. Scientific American does. Why? I got an email from a guy who told me his daughter works at CDC and they're already telling people post-election they're going to lobby for reparations for descendants of slaves. All is politics. Politics is all. All is narrative. Narrative is all. That's what color revolution looks like, by the way.
I have another question, too. Do you have more? I don't want to overstep. His name is slipping for the last almost 40-plus years. The government agency primarily tasked with granting grants to research universities, research groups, agencies whatsoever on the topic of allergies, infectious diseases, things like that. Up until last year, there was a guy who was writing all of those checks. I can't remember his name.
Couple more things. The term leaky vaccine making a comeback. What's leaky vaccine mean? Just to repeat, leaky vaccine means it's not a vaccine. Means it doesn't, there's two kinds, perfect and leaky. Leaky means that it actually does what you think a vaccine is supposed to do, which is inoculate you from getting the contagion, the pathogen. All right. When you use a leaky vaccine, what will happen is you'll often make the variants that will come next worse by presenting a weaker form of immunity up against the superior virus. Like Delta variant was worse than the original variant of COVID-19 because of our leaky vaccine. And then this quote at the end from Peter McCullough, "We've never had a human death of bird flu in America," end quote. And then he goes on to mention all the treatment medications we have for the flu-like symptoms. Any of this sound familiar? Any of this sound familiar? Flu-like. Remember when they told us to stop calling it the flu, and then the first time Debbie Birx came out with that map at the White House, the chart was based on, quote, influenza-like illness. Do you guys remember this? Yeah. Nothing new under the sun, folks.
Oh, more than
Nothing.
you're even letting on, or that Peter lets on, because Peter doesn't tell you on this that, oh, by the way, he's become as critical as anybody. And he says, my learning curve on this since COVID has been vast about the entire vaccination schedule, mRNA or otherwise, for children. So, yeah, it sounds very, very familiar to me.
And so he mentions Theraflu and a bunch of other things that you can do. Remember when I sat here during COVID? I'm like, guys, I was an asthmatic. I was in hospitals in the early 80s as a little kid. All right. We had mechanisms to treat pulmonary inflammation in emergency rooms 40 years ago because I received them. And now many of them, you can just have a nebulizer at your house. Nothing. There's no steroid, no nebulizer. There's nothing we can do up against pulmonary distress or infection. Nothing other than go home till you can't breathe and come back and we'll put you on a ventilator. There's nothing else. How much, if this thing really does go... It really does get deployed. Are we now going to say, guys, turns out we can't treat a flu. We don't have anything to treat flus. Yes. We don't have anything at all. Go home, come back, and there's nothing other than our experimental mRNAs. This is the same game plan all over again. The same thing all over again. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation now. Before we let you go, I want to go back to what we talked about last hour, talking about election fraud. Make sure you check out our colleague Sarah Gonzalez, her new special, Voter Fraud Exposed, How Elections Can Be Stolen. It's absolutely outstanding. We've just had a run of outstanding documentaries here recently at the Blaze, and this one is absolutely worthy of such a description. BlazeOriginals.com/Deace. If you want to find out why I don't think Michigan's winnable, BlazeOriginals.com/Deace. Just go watch for yourself. Get $30 off with the code VOTERFRAUD. $30 off with the code VOTERFRAUD at BlazeOriginals.com/Deace. Again, $30 off with the code VOTERFRAUD at BlazeOriginals.com/Deace. Less than a minute. Anybody got one last thing to say before we sign off?
For any of this to stop, you have got to realize how much of an addict you are. I wish it were otherwise, but that's the simple truth of the matter.
I just want to reiterate, everything we're talking about here starts with the premise, the foundational premise that is essentially ye be like God. The curse of sin and death doesn't apply to me. It doesn't apply to you. Science will save us. It's anti-God. That's the premise of modern science, or what we call science.
Amen. We're going to stick around and do overtime for subscribers. For the rest of you, we'll see you tomorrow. Until then, Romans 8:28.